Supreme Chancellor Obi-Wan Kenobi by Stone Freak. Chapter 45. Obi-Wan meditates and remembers. Having said his goodbyes to Ahsoka, Obi-Wan heads toward the Room of 1,000 Fountains, after having cleaned up in the fresher and put on a new set of clothes, of course, to enjoy some meditation, some time alone with peace and quiet. He sits down in a secluded spot, surrounded by plants and flowers, next to one of the smaller fountains. He takes off his boots and sets them aside, pulls his socks off and folds them before he sits down with crossed legs and his hands lying limply on his knees. He closes his eyes. Flowing water, falling drops hitting a smooth water surface, a bowl that continuously overflows, the rustle of leaves, soft grass beneath him, stroking and not quite tickling his bare feet, the gentle scent of geranium and jasmine, warm sunlight on his face, the essence of the living force. He hasn't always enjoyed meditation. In his teens, he was too filled with energy. Sitting still for so long, trying to grasp the force, had been difficult. He was better at connecting with it when moving, during katas or similar physical activity. His connection, however, was always the strongest when his need for it was the greatest, during times of danger. He was 18 when his master finally managed to show him what meditation could be. A mission gone wrong. A sharp feeling of wonder, of worry lances through him. Had the mission specs been altered? Were they supposed to die? The mission had them separated and fighting their way out of a revolution gone wrong. At the end, when they had finally found each other and escaped in the back of a cattle shuttle, Obi-Wan had been both utterly exhausted and too keyed up on adrenaline to even consider sleeping.
"You must rest, Padawan,"
Qui-Gon murmured gently, pulling Obi-Wan down to sit next to him. "I know, Master. I just... Obi-Wan trailed off, unsure how to express himself, too tired to think properly.
"I see. I believe some meditation would do you good right now."
"Oh." Qui-Gon's face was calm, almost placid, but Obi-Wan was sure he was amused by this, now that they were finally safe. "Meditation is the last thing I need," Obi-Wan muttered, not petulantly at all, mind you. Qui-Gon huffed out a laugh.
"You would say that, Padawan mine. However, as I believe it is, I will lead you through it."
He tucked his feet in and straightened his back, now towering over Obi-Wan. With a sigh, Obi-Wan copied his master's position, their knees now pressed together. A large, warm hand wrapped around Obi-Wan's just as he closed his eyes, and he let himself smile. His master hadn't led him through meditation like this in years. It was comforting in a way, familiar and nostalgic. It started like it always did, just Obi-Wan and his thoughts. Slowly, with the warm hand anchoring him, he felt his master's presence on more than the physical plane. He felt the warmth of his light and the hint of growth and life that he carried within him, the depth of his connection to the living force. Bouncing off his master's presence, Obi-Wan suddenly felt everything. Every single animal on the ship, slow and peaceful energy. Every single sentient, buzzing, more frenetic thoughts and emotions whirling. He stretched himself out and let the force sweep his mind away. He felt the stars, the worlds, the very cosmic vastness of the force itself, and it was beautiful.
"Come back now, Obi-Wan. Ground yourself, Padawan mine."
His master's voice echoed in Obi-Wan's head, warm and amused. Obi-Wan pulled back from the force, regretful to leave its embrace, and centered himself, returned to being simply Obi-Wan again. Qui-Gon's warm hand was like an anchor, so very real. Obi-Wan opened his eyes and turned to meet his master's kind eyes.
"I'm tired,"
Obi-Wan whispered. His mind was finally quiet, just as tired as his exhausted body, but so filled with peace. Everything else seemingly washed away by the force.
"You should sleep, Obi-Wan."
Qui-Gon moved them around, barely struggling at all, despite Obi-Wan's exhausted, dead weight. until Obi-Wan found himself curled in his lap, head resting against Qui-Gon's shoulder.
"It was beautiful, Master,"
Obi-Wan mumbled, eyelids drooping. He fell asleep then, nestled in his master's embrace, warm and safe, with the feeling of a large hand stroking his hair. For a long time, Obi-Wan was unable to think of his master without grief. It speared through him so completely, he sometimes couldn't breathe with it. He spoke with Master Yoda often during those early days, whenever Anakin was in class, and the old master could spare a moment.
"Grief for those no longer with us. You should not. One with the Force they are. Accept your grief. You should. Look into the Force. You should. Miss them. Do not. For one with the Force they are."
It didn't help. Not at first. Not missing Qui-Gon seemed like an impossibility. Obi-Wan had been at his side for a decade. The man was in many ways like his father, and Obi-Wan loves him. How could he possibly not grieve?
Limitless beings are we. Not this crude matter.
It took time, but he found his answers. The feeling of his master's presence clinging stubbornly to one of his plants as Obi-Wan planted them in the temple gardens or the room of 1,000 fountains. Memories evoked by the scent of his master's favorite tea, calling upon his memories with the Force and almost reliving them again. His master's presence present and warm, the moment so clear as if it were happening right then and there. A life remembered is a life never truly lost, merely one return to the Force. The Force is always with him, and so his master too is always with him. It's not a perfect solution, but possibly could be with the loss of a life. But it is enough to help him deal with the grief, give it less hold over him, and it allowed him to move on, live his life, and do his duty as best he can. Isn't that what his master would have wanted? The Force is always there, and he can find peace in it, so it diminishes his grief until he's ready to let it go. He feels lighter when he does, as if a heavy burden has been lifted. It's not gone forever. The grief comes again, the sadness occasionally sweeps over him, but Obi-Wan knows how to deal with it, and how to live with it. It's no longer the very center of his life, as it was at first, and he can instead focus on the lives that are still there, still around him. Like his former Padawan, his friends, and his great-grandmaster, who has lived long enough to lose more than his fair share of people. Obi-Wan surfaces from his meditations briefly. A cerulean hawk butterfly has landed on a knuckle on his right hand, its startlingly blue wings held open, almost as if on display. He smiles briefly, and the wind, artificial perhaps, but still real enough, rustles his hair. Obi-Wan can almost swear it feels like fingers brushing his fringe away from his forehead. He closes his eyes and reaches for the Force once more.